This quaint traditional five-star hotel in South Africa's capital city of Pretoria is the headquarters of one of the most exclusive railway companies in the world, and one which declares itself as operating the most luxurious trains in the world, Rovos Rail. The Victoria Hotel is also the starting point for many of the passengers travelling on this luxurious train service. And it is here that they are greeted prior to their departure on the Pride of Africa by the man who founded this unique and prestigious railway company, and one who welcomes the passengers whenever he can, as though they were guests in his own home, Rovos.
Welcome again, and for those of you that came from Cape Town, thank you very much indeed. And there are just a few things of importance that I must bring to your attention before we do go. I have, by the way, everything I was going to say in the speech now, I've in fact typed out this morning and will be put into your suite.
Rowan Voss first got involved in trains as a hobby when he was asked to help out with the restoration project of an old steam locomotive. It wasn't long, however, before his interest started to grow into something that he never envisaged.
Then I thought it might be fun to have a few of my own carriages, and I bought some on auction and started converting them in fact into a family caravan. And that was going to be 4 carriages. I then asked the railways, look chaps, I want to buy my own locomotive as well and drag this entourage around the country. And they said, well, it hasn't been done before, but I can apply, so I did. And about 3 months later, nobody was more surprised than myself when I did get permission to do so, to run my own train. The permutations, however, were that expensive that it would have been vastly extravagant of me to be running this family caravan. So I complained bitterly. And they came back and said, all right, well, if you don't like it, you can sell tickets. So at that stage, I think I had 15 odd businesses going, small businesses going throughout the Eastern Transvaal. So I thought, well, this is going to be number 16, so much for my holiday vehicle, which I was trying to create. And anyway, we sat down, the next day, and when I say we, myself and my wife, and we thought, well, so much for the family caravan, let's turn it into a tourist vehicle. I knew nothing about tourism, and I knew nothing about trains. So the learning curve was huge, and of course that was tremendous fun. And needless to say, at the age of 40, I had money for these sort of things, and now at the age of 50, I'm broke. So one wonders, how involved I should have got in trains. But we're starting to make some money now, so I'm actually happy that I did what I did. And from the beginning, with 4 carriages, it grew to 7 carriages originally in 1989. April 89, so we're nearly 10 years old. And we're now up to running 48 carriages and will be 55 by the end of the year. The fact that I knew nothing about trains and I knew nothing about tourism probably has resulted in what we've got today. We've just secured, in fact in January, I secured a 15-year lease on a 25-acre property, which is in fact the old locomotive sheds in Pretoria. We are busy building a station building, which will be a reception area, and also we'll have, upstairs anyway, we'll have facilities for all my administration and sales staff, reservation staff. We are building a 300-meter long platform, and we will then have our own arrivals and departures at our own site. So this is going to give our guests the best arrival and departure of any train in the world, definitely.
This train has just been cleaned and prepared, and is now on its way from the workshop to the station at Pretoria to pick up new passengers for a trip to Victoria Falls. With all departures from Rovos Rail, the passengers are given a champagne send-off as they are first greeted by the train manager. Then, whenever possible, Rowan Voss himself calls the passengers for boarding. There is one member of staff responsible for 2 carriages and 6 cabins, and he or she shows each passenger to the right cabin as the name is called, and makes sure all of their baggage is taken care of.
We run 2 20-carriage trains on a cycle, It's a 14-day cycle between Cape Town and Victoria Falls. And those two trains then run opposite one another. So we have a weekly departure for both Cape Town or Victoria Falls from the head office, which is Pretoria. We then have a third train, which will be complete by the end of the year. And that'll be 13 carriages with a maximum of 23 suites or 42 passengers. And that will run between Pretoria and Kruger Park, all the game reserves. And also, it'll be available for charter. That's quite an interesting one because we haven't done much charter before. And the moment we put the word out that we had a vehicle available for charter, it seems to be working pretty hard. So we've got a lot of advanced bookings already, which is quite pleasing.
One wonders just how easy it can be to find so many vintage carriages to make up this magnificent fleet.
Initially, I was very purist in my ideas, and I specifically wanted 1920s. So I went out of my way to find 1920s carriages, which I was successful in doing. Some of them were up at the top of mountains as holiday homes. In fact, the one carriage, which you'll probably see today, was exactly that, up in the mountains of Machadodorp, and it cost a fortune. We had to build a road to get the thing down. We had to find wheels for it because it was on a concrete base. And that's one of the balcony carriages we've got. Another one was a monument, in fact, in front of a construction company in Cape Town. So the same thing had to happen there. I had to get it off its plinth and put it onto wheels. Others I bought from private individuals all over the country. You know, they were in backyards or they were restaurants. In fact, our three lounge cars were in fact a restaurant in Johannesburg. And I bought the carriages off the restaurant and then put them back on wheels and so forth. Then I specifically did a deal with Spoornet, or the South African Railways, and I purchased a tranche of 38 carriages at once, in fact, with them all modern undercarriages and steel-bodied versus the wooden-bodied. Not that I wanted steel-bodied, but in fact that was all that was available. But the undercarriages are more modern. They're sort of 1950s plus, whereas the rest of my coaches are all 1950s minus. And so they do ride better, and obviously we can get spares and that sort of thing, which assists us in running a proper schedule. I started this thing off, as I said, as a family caravan. And being tall, I obviously endeavored to make beds bigger and make doorways bigger or higher anyway, so that I could get through them without breaking my head open. And with all those personal requirements, and I did own a yacht at one stage, so I'd learned a little bit about micro-engineering, or should I say micro-carpentry. So I applied all that knowledge to the train. But by not having experience of other trains, I said, you know, I sort of looked at a room and said, right, this room's too small. Well, let's break out the next bulkhead. And we broke out the next bulkhead, and I said, well, it's still too small. And so we progressed until we had only 2 suites in a carriage. And I thought, wow, you know, this is now really extravagant. We've got a bathroom, we've got 2 suites, but, you know, you put 4 people in a carriage, and suddenly the financials don't look so sort of healthy. And I thought, well, we've got to reverse the trend. So we then put 3 suites into a carriage. But that was the tightest that I was prepared to go. Now, when I did eventually ride on other trains, well, the Blue Train, in fact, at that stage, had 7 or 8 suites per carriage. So that was very tiny, you know, so I didn't want to go that route. And in fact, what I was looking for was the double bed and the lounge area, you know, and a bathroom en suite. I was looking for those as prerequisites. And that obviously drove me to doing what I did do. Then I had the good fortune to ride on the Orient Express in 92, 93. And that was the wonderful experience for me, because suddenly I was seeing, yes, somebody is actually doing something similar. And I had the occasion to see the Royal Scotsman some time later, and I was again pleased to see that I was on the right track. Again, they had put 4 suites into a carriage versus my 3, and I thought, no, I'm not going to go to the 4. We will retain the space we've got and take the knock on the bottom line without getting too expensive. Obviously, one has to watch what one's competition is doing from a pricing point of view. Although that's becoming less important now as time goes by. People now want to use our vehicle, as an experience. So the price, I don't think, is that sensitive an issue. But then I went and rode on all these other trains, and it was actually very pleasing for me to do so. And it corroborated my earlier thinking. I thought, well, I did the right thing in my family caravan planning. So we are today the most spacious train in the world today.
Accommodation on board the train is of the very highest standard, with a great deal of attention given to even the finest of details. Use of traditional furnishings and period decor, with exquisite craftsmanship evident in the fine woodwork, has ensured that the atmosphere of elegance and grandeur far exceeds the original in both classes of suite available. Each with the option of twin or double beds and a lounge area and ensuite bathrooms. There are 4 royal suites, which take up half a carriage each, and 30 deluxe suites, which are a third of a carriage each, carrying a maximum of 72 passengers on each train. All of the beautifully restored carriages provide the very last word in style and comfort, combining the opulence of pre-war travel with subtle modern innovations. The dining cars are characterized by 7 pairs of carved wooden roof supporting pillars and arches, creating a traditional Victorian atmosphere. Whilst the tables are laid with the finest linen and exquisite glass and silverware. Each one of Rovos Rail's magnificent dining cars is capable of seating up to 44 passengers. Possibly the most magnificent of all the carriages is the rear observation and bar car, with ample, comfortable seating for all the guests. The windows have been enlarged to ensure as much of an unobstructed view of the passing countryside as possible. Whilst at the back of the coach, there is a balcony and observation deck where you can sit and watch some of the most spectacular scenery in Africa pass you by. This is the train that we were going to take on our journey from Cape Town to Knysna along South Africa's famous garden route. The train was undergoing preparations prior to its journey to Cape Town the following day. Washing and polishing a vehicle inside and out, when that vehicle is almost half a kilometre long, is by no means an easy feat, especially when it's done by hand. And the staff here at the Rovos Rail Works in Pretoria carry out this task on each train after each and every journey. Rovos Rail employ over 170 staff at the Pretoria works. Not all of them are involved in the restoration or cleaning of carriages. Some of the workforce are kept busy restoring and maintaining the company's fleet of vintage steam locomotives.
We have in fact 7 of our own locomotives, of which 4 are now operating. We have 5 are operating. We have 3 19 class, all sort of 1938. They are 44,000 pounds drawbar power. And then we have a little 6 class, which is 1893, and that's the oldest, to my knowledge, the oldest commercially operating locomotive in the world today. And it's too sweet for words. And that was a monument, in fact, on a station in the Free State when I purchased it. And that's half the power, it's about 25,000 pounds drawbar. And then a 25 class, which we're just finishing off now, and that's about 60,000 pounds drawbar power, which will be able to pull our 20 carriages on its own. So we run these 4 or 5 locomotives at the moment, but we don't go terribly far. The water and coaling facilities have unfortunately been removed around the countryside. So, a point is that these locomotives, especially the big one, that uses about 400 litres of water per kilometre, 100 US gallons. and uses close on 100 kilograms of coal per kilometre. Now, when you consider those volumes, we obviously have to refill the water tender, which holds 50,000 litres. So every 100 kilometres, we've got to stop and put in 50,000 litres of water. Or in the case like this morning, where we double head with two 19 classes, we need about 60,000 litres of water. And, you know, when that happens, and especially in the smaller towns and in the drier areas that we have in South Africa, you are, in fact, denuding the town of water, you know, for X amount of hours.
One place in South Africa where there is no shortage of water is Sun City. And it was here that we decided to spend the next few days before travelling on the train. We stayed at the incredibly luxurious Palace of the Lost City. Legend has it that long before the dawn of a Western civilization, a nomadic tribe from northern Africa set out to seek a new world, a land of peace and plenty. The tribe wandered for many years in search of such a magical place. The land they discovered became the legendary Valley of the Sun. From out of the jungle, they created an amazing city with a magnificent palace, a world more rich and more splendid than any they had ever known. Destroyed in later years by an earthquake, the nomads fled, never to return. Discovered by archaeologists centuries later, that place has been restored to its former glory, the most extraordinary hotel in the world. Centerpiece of this magnificent structure is the life-size bronze of the largest African elephant ever known, Shawu. Surrounding the palace is the Lost City, one of the most exciting and wondrous resorts in the world. Sun City have recreated the mystery and marvels of an age-old mythical civilization on 25 hectares of exotic jungle, threaded with a wonderland of wildlife and waterscapes, including their own beach in the Valley of Waves. The Lost City cost a staggering $300 million to build. Situated next to the Pilanesberg mountain range and next to the Pilanesberg Game Reserve, just 2 hours driving time from Johannesburg, Sun City has 4 high-quality hotels, including the Lost Palace. These, along with the casinos and finest golf courses in Africa, make this resort one of the finest and most luxurious in the world. A few days later, and we were in Cape Town, staying at one of the finest, if not the most luxurious hotel in the city. Gleaming like an ocean liner in the heart of the newly constructed Victoria and Albert waterfront, the Table Bay Hotel. The quiet, elegant style of this hotel, usually associated with great cruise liners, has been created using a subtle blend of Victorian, colonial and Cape Dutch themes. But possibly its finest attribute is the spectacular view of Cape Town's majestic landmark, Table Mountain. Cape Town is the mother city of South Africa, being the site of the first European landings and settlements in the country, and it has now grown into one of the 6 most beautiful cities in the world. The subtle interplay of sea and mountain moved the intrepid explorer Sir Francis Drake to call it the fairest cape in all the circumference of the globe. One can't visit Cape Town without experiencing a trip by cable car to the top of Table Mountain. 1,000 meters above sea level, you seem to be able to see forever as you look out over the dramatic vista where 2 oceans meet. For those with a strong stomach and no fear of heights, Table Mountain offers one of the most sensational thrills, abseiling off.
For me, this is the best abseil ever. It's really, really awesome. And it's off Table Mountain, which is another thing. I mean, that's just all in its own.
Although we were in a hurry to catch our train, we decided to use the more conventional method of coming back down. It was time to catch our train, which was now waiting on the platform at Cape Town Station. We had been told that the 400-mile route we were taking between Cape Town and Knysna was one of the most beautiful railway routes in the world. And as our fellow passengers were greeted with a warm welcome from the crew, along with the customary champagne to the accompaniment of chamber music, there was an air of excitement. just as when you walk into a 5-star hotel for the first time. First impressions are very important. And despite being on a grey, drafty concrete railway platform, this promised to have all the hallmarks of railway travel at its very best. And within the first few minutes of arriving, it was obvious we were not going to be disappointed. The journey to Knysna was going to take just over 24 hours, spending one night on board the train, travelling along the famous garden route, through the Hottentots Holland Mountains, then passing through the vineyards to Ashton, where we'd been promised a chance to sample the very best of local wine. From Ashton we travel overnight, reaching Mossel Bay during the early hours of the morning. From there, we follow the coastal line, overlooking the ocean until arriving in the town of George, where we transfer to a steam locomotive for the run into Knysna. It was time for the passengers to board the train. Very soon we'd be on our way, and the station platform was being returned to its former anonymity of grey concrete. With the last guests now boarding, the red carpet was rolled up. Although we knew this treatment was accorded to all Rovos Rail passengers, one couldn't help feeling that all this ceremony was exclusively reserved for just us privileged few taking the train today. And that treatment of being made to feel like an important visitor to someone's home was to continue throughout our journey. Our adventure had begun. Although we had travelled on many of the world-class trains before, the thrill and excitement of setting off into the unknown aboard a train of gleaming carriages brimming with nostalgia and sheer luxury never changes. It's always as if you're doing it for the first time, and you know that whatever experience lies ahead of those parallel steel rails, it will be very different from the last time. As we leave the city outskirts, the passengers withdraw to their cabins to unpack and settle in. As with most of the high-quality trains, one of the crew is on hand to introduce themselves and explain the layout of each cabin and show what is available for the passengers' own use. Rovos Rail offer all their passengers the same, if not better service and facilities than you would expect in any of the world's top hotels. Air conditioning is essential in this part of the world, with its varied climate, and each cabin is fitted with its own individual unit, which can be set to the passenger's personal preference at the touch of a button.
A little mini fridge here for you. Okay. I've stocked it at the moment. I've got milk, of which I've got the tea and coffee sets underneath here in this drawer underneath. I've got fruits, I've got juice, I've got tonic water, Coke, soda water, but unfortunately I don't know your personal taste. You can tell me whatever you want to be stocked in your fridge. Okay, this is the blow dryer. Okay, once you touch it, it goes on. I've got the shaving spots right here. Okay.
Living on board a train does take some getting used to, and if it is your first time experience, it takes a short while to become accustomed to the lack of space. However, on Rovos Rail, that is less of a problem, as the cabins are much larger than on other trains.
Extra soap for you, tissues, hand lotion. It's right here. This is the laundry bag. Okay, I'm gonna show
This
you
train is the first one that we have so far encountered, which offers a full laundry, cleaning and pressing service on board, possibly something that some of the other world-class trains could consider, especially on some of the longer journeys of 2 nights or more, when one is required to wear evening dress every night.
right in here. Okay.
For those that haven't travelled on trains before, and we get quite a lot of those, in fact, out of the guests that departed this morning, probably fully half of them haven't been on a train before, except for their local commuter train in their town of origin or city of origin. So for them, you know, the whole thing is brand new. They're getting onto a train, and suddenly they've got a room and they've got a bed and they've got cupboards, and so I think for them there's not much of a culture shock, in fact, because they come on board and say, oh, this is sort of small, but it's still a hotel room. You've got everything. You've got a bar fridge. You've got tea and coffee facilities. You've got a double bed if you want it, or single beds if you so require. You've got air conditioning units which are independently operated. We've got underfloor heating now. What else do we have? Well, we have everything that you can and we've got little digital safes as well. So there's nothing that a 5-star hotel room has that we don't have. That's first, except obviously a restricted size. For the experienced traveler, he who has been on all the other named trains, you know, we're very happy to have those people on the train because they then know what other trains do, and specifically the space available to them. They obviously can compare the culinary experience. They can compare the lengths of the train. They can compare the ride. We don't have a modern vehicle, no. So we don't have the same ride as the Blue Train, for argument's sake. But we do have a better ride than all the others, for the simple reason that our track is in reasonably good condition in South Africa. And secondly, we travel at 60 kilometers an hour or less. In fact, we average 40. And when one looks at the fact that trains like the Orient Express and so on are running at 100 to 140 kilometers an hour, speed makes a huge difference to the exercise from 2 points of view. First of all, you can observe the countryside, and it gives the mind, it's an interesting thing actually, it gives the mind time to absorb the picture, to analyze it, and to make a comment on it to your neighbor or your partner, or to write it down. And that alone creates a huge amount of opportunity for the traveler. We have no television, we have no radios, we have no other entertainment on board besides eating and sleeping, if that can be called entertainment, and conversation. I think the most important part of the experience is, and that's what I've hoped to achieve here, by aiming for a family caravan and a home as such. It is my home. That's how I train all my staff. Is when they join me, I say, listen, you must understand, this is not a hotel. It's my home, it's your home. You are, to all intents and purposes, my wife. We're inviting our guests into our home, and you will jolly well look after them as if that was the case. And that immediately does change the style of service that we have. And that comes through on the comment sheets quite often from passengers, is that they really enjoy the discreet, efficient, and friendly service. That comes through all the time, is the friendliness. And that's what I do try to achieve by having a family train. So for the jaded passenger, certainly, that is a different experience. It's a friendly, it's a happy experience. It is very comfortable. He sees a lot of the countryside that he wouldn't have seen otherwise, and he sees it in safety.
Travelling by train gives a unique way of seeing the passing countryside. On this train, in the observation car, the windows have been made larger. Sitting there watching the kaleidoscope of dramatic scenes unfurl one after the other, it was almost as though you were watching a big motion picture in CinemaScope in the privacy of your own home, each window offering a different vista as we rolled through the valleys between the Hottentots Holland mountain range. It is late afternoon, and we've arrived at the town of Ashton, approximately 150 miles from Cape Town. We've stopped to visit one of this area's most well-known vineyards, the Zandvliet Wine Estate. Much to the passengers' amusement, we are greeted by the family's pet parrot, who sits at the entrance of this grand whitewashed Cape Dutch homestead, watching and introducing himself to the passengers as they arrive by minibus. The first part of the tour, and for most of us the highlight, was the chance to sample some of the estate's produce. South Africa is currently the 8th largest wine producer in the world and has the oldest wine industry outside of Europe and the Mediterranean. The first grapes were planted in this area in 1655, and the very first pressings took place 4 years later in 1659. The white wines include Chenin Blanc, Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc, as well as the more specialist muscatels known locally as Hanepoot. The reds from this area include Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Pinot Noir, Shiraz, Hermitage, and a local hybrid, Pinotage. The Zandvliet estate is not only a producer of fine wines, however. They also run a highly acclaimed stud farm for breeding racehorses, which are sold to owners throughout the world. When we visited, it was early spring in South Africa, and 50 of the mares were heavily pregnant with their foals due at any time. Whilst out in the paddock, we found one mother that had already given birth only 3 days before. As he stumbled around the paddock, it was hard to imagine that this young fellow would one day in the not-too-distant future be running the Grand National or the Kentucky Derby. It was by now late afternoon, and the sun was beginning to set. As the horses were being stabled for the night, it was time too for us to leave and rejoin the Pride of Africa, waiting for us on the platform at Ashton Station. It was almost time for dinner, and the train's 2 chefs were busy preparing the evening fare. The standard of cuisine is everything one would expect from a 5-star establishment. However, when you consider the difference in size from a hotel's kitchen to the cramped size of the galley on a train, preparing dinner for 70 or so guests at the same time cannot be an easy task. The menu varies on each trip, but you are likely to be given a choice ranging from grilled duck breast or rainbow trout, or beef Wellington, or maybe the South African kingklip fish, served with a choice of the very finest South African wines.
It's not usually that it's only traditional meals. We do have traditional meals like some things which can be found locally, like fish, prawns, Cape Town smoked salmons, whatever it is which you can find here. And we've also got Norwegian smoked salmon from Norway, which we also cook in here and give to our guests so they can have the best. We also use food like, as I told you earlier, that there's boboti, which is not a South African meal. It's a Malaysian food for the time of the slave trade. So we are cooking in this train as a memory of the slave trade time. So we've got different kinds of meals, and we have got also some other kinds of guests in this train, which is sometimes they don't want the menu which you have given. They also ask a different kind of menu which they want to eat. We will never say no to them. We have to cook to whatever they want.
As the guests dined in romantic candlelight, the Pride of Africa rolled on through the night, passing through little-known villages with names such as Buffelsjagrivier and Carringmelk. Even at night, this is an incomparable way to travel through one of the most beautiful countries in the world. As the sun rises on the second and final day of our adventure, we are treated to a spectacular view of the white-crested waves rolling off the Indian Ocean as we continue our journey along the Garden Route. By now, some of the guests had risen for breakfast. an exotic array of fresh fruit, followed by a choice of eggs in every which way you can imagine. We're approaching the town of Mossel Bay, a commercial seaport on the slopes of Cape St. Blaise, a town famous for its seafood, fishing harbour and hospitality, and also a town steeped in South African history. Situated on a sun-washed peninsula embraced by the warm Indian Ocean, it was here that the Portuguese explorer Bartholomew Dias made his first landing after rounding the Cape in 1488. Mossel Bay has a uniquely moderate year-round climate, second only to that of Hawaii, making it a bustling resort in summer and during winter an ideal warm retreat. And on some days, you can look out from the train and watch the whales and dolphins at play in the ocean. If you are a real railway enthusiast, then Mossel Bay is well worth a visit. The early days of trains are closely linked with this town, as it was once a vital link in South Africa's steam network, and has, since the demise of steam, become the largest centre for maintaining and restoring steam locomotives in the country. Continuing along the coastal line, we should be arriving at our next port of call at 8:45 a.m. Rovos Rail pride themselves on keeping wherever possible to the timetable for their schedule, while still retaining the completely relaxed ambience on board.
I think the whole business of train travel is that we want everybody to be good at it and be successful and not get a bad reputation. Because if one of us does a bad job, then the whole concept of train travel will be lowered. And so we want everybody to do well. We think we're pretty good, but there are other people who have other strengths as well. We have a lot more space than most trains out of people's cabins. The cabins are another factor as well, but there's no other train in the world that can put as many bums on seats out of their suites than we can. Rowan Voss has said that he wants this to be an extension of his home, and I don't think you'd find him sleeping in a bunk bed at home. People who come to Africa are not on cheap package holidays, so the people who are coming us have a certain level of income. Having said that, we get quite a lot of honeymoon couples. We get the young people as well, and they seem to enjoy it very much as well. To a lot, it's a unique experience. The last time they travelled was 40 years ago when they went to school on a train. So this is the kind of concept they've got in their mind. To others, it's a case of thinking, well, I want to see the country and I want to just relax after 5 days in the bush, or I'm going to have 5 days at Sun City or something like this, that they want to have a total change before getting on with the next part of their holiday. Or, and this happens a lot, they use this as a beginning or an end of their holiday. And it's just something to top it off or to start it or kick-start it. And it is the unique way of looking at a country. There's no other way that you can relax and look at the scenery from this angle. It's better than anything, apart from being on a bicycle, for instance.
We are arriving at the town of George, the capital city and geographical hub of the Garden Route. It is situated in a picturesque environment on a coastal plateau between the Indian Ocean and the Utaniqua Mountains, which give it its year-round temperate climate, similar to that of Mossel Bay. It is a relatively quiet place, which was founded in 1811 and named after King George III, and standing in the foothills of the mountain forests with their stinkwood and yellowwood trees, the town used to rely on forestry as its main source of revenue. Today, however, it's a different story, and George has grown into a commercial city with modern shopping centres and a major business centre catering for the Southern Cape region. All passengers have to disembark at George. For some, this is the end of the adventure, but for most, it means changing to another train for the continuing journey to Knysna. The rear carriages, under the careful eye of the train manager, are split from the rest of the train and are shunted down the line onto another track, where they're coupled up to the rear of another train. Whilst the luggage is transported by road, the next part of the journey is going to be even more spectacular as we join the Utaniqua Chojo. This is South Africa's last scheduled steam service, which runs on the Utaniqualand Preserve Railway all the way to Knysna. taking in along the way some of the most diverse and fascinating scenery, including mountains, forests, lakes, lagoons, and sun-soaked coastline. This is Dolphins Point in the area of Wilderness, a huge national park with no less than 5 rivers and 5 lakes, 9 miles east of George, and the site of the Cayman River Bridge, spanning this charming and beautiful bay. Our train has already left George and is now steaming through the tunnel. We have reached the largest and most beautiful of the coastal resorts along the Garden Route, Neisner. The town is built around the hilly shores of a huge blue lagoon, which is now a protected area known as the Neisner National Lake. Neisner has a lot to offer, both recreationally and historically, but its uniqueness lies in its people, and this is reflected in the many arts and craft shops and the vibrant cultural life of the town. A short walk from the station reveals a treasure trove of interesting people and places. Galleries, flea markets, pavement cafes, and historic buildings all make up this delightful spot. The lagoon runs out to sea between the 2 sheer red sandstone cliffs called the Heads, the eastern of which is easily accessible by land and gives splendid views over the town, the ocean, and the coral reef. Back at the railway station, with the passengers departed, the train is being turned around, ready for its journey back to George. The two Rovos carriages are shunted by the steam locomotive onto a huge turntable, which turns each carriage individually and then shunts them back to be coupled up to the rear, which was the front of the rest of the train, ensuring that the observation car is at the back for the return journey. Once that is complete, then the locomotive itself is also turned around. Now back at the platform, the train is ready for a new group of passengers to board, making the journey back to Cape Town. They will not join their cabins until we reach George, but in the meantime, they will receive the very best hospitality, including champagne and oysters, served in the bar and observation car. It's time to leave as the locomotive builds up steam. It made for a wondrous sight, seeing this gleaming machine sitting almost incongruously in the sun, shaded only by the leaves of a palm tree. The final whistle goes, and the Utanika Chojo gradually picks up steam and slowly glides away from the station platform. This was a return to the golden age of steam at its very best, something out of every schoolboy's daydreams, and a scene which could have been taken from any picture book on the bygone days of railway travel. Following the same route back, the Utanika Chojo steams across the Great Lakes between the town of Sedgefield and Wilderness, a protected wetlands area and a sanctuary for hundreds of different varieties of birds, waterfowl, fish and wildlife. Finally, the Outeniquachujo steams onto the platform at George Station, the end of the line for this section of track, and the beginning of the line for the new passengers to sample the full delights of Rovos Rail for their journey on to Cape Town. This has been just one of the many adventures you can take on this outstanding train, and one of the shortest. Cape Town to Dar es Salaam in Zanzibar, the longest trip, will take you 12 days. But this journey has been everything and more that Rovos Rail promised. The accommodation was of the highest standard, and the very last word in comfort and style. The service and courtesy of the staff was impeccable, and we have experienced an adventure through wondrous vistas in a manner which can be experienced in no other way. These beautiful trains are a credit to a man who gambled his hard-earned fortune on something which started off as no more than a whim of owning his own caravan on rails.
Most certainly now I'm very happy to be doing what I'm doing. It's the most exciting business to be in. There's so many exciting things to do. When I get up in the morning, I'm probably the luckiest guy on earth today that I can get up and say, right, I'm going to do what I want to do. There's the odd times you have to do what you have to do, you know, like answer letters and all that sort of boring, dull sort of manager type stuff. But generally speaking, I would say 90% of the day belongs to me. And that's wonderful that I can now, I can work within an environment which is my hobby, and at the same time brings joy to others. So I have people, I have happy people, I have happy staff, I have happy guests, I have a happy bank manager, and you know, I have a happy family, and I have a happy me. So I can't tell you the excitement. You know, I'm like a kid with a new toy, and in fact, I will have the most perfect toy train set in the world when we're finished at the end of the year.
Now rolling through the countryside, retracing the same route as the outward journey, the train heads towards Table Mountain, towering majestically over the skyline. The end of the line for the pride of Africa.